In 1842, there were people in America who were not allowed enough water to wash their own faces. Not because water did not exist, not because rivers were far away, because dignity was being rationed. You wake before sunrise, not to a clock, not to comfort, to breath. Heavy breath, other people's breath, the breath of a room that never fully empties of sweat, smoke, sickness, and yesterday. You open your eyes in a cabin holding 11 bodies, one room, one dying fire, no privacy, no quiet, no corner that belongs only to you. Your skin still carries the field. Cotton dust in the cracks of your hands, dried sweat stiff along your neck, a cut near your wrist that was never cleaned properly, mud worked into your ankles, smoke clinging to your hair. You want one thing, water. Not for cooking, not for the planter's table, not for the washing basin in the big house, for you. To wash your own face, to wipe the day off your body, to feel for 1 minute like your skin belongs to you. But there is no pump in the yard, no clean towel folded nearby, no bar of soap waiting in a dry place, no basin set aside for your hands, no mirror, no door you can close, no moment no one can interrupt. Just the room, the smell, the bodies shifting awake. A woman near the far wall leans toward her daughter and whispers something too soft to hear. An old man in the corner coughs into his fist and tries to sit up without waking the child beside him. 2 boys sleep near the door, pressed shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat because warmth, like everything else here, has to be shared or stolen. And you think, is this what it means to be made invisible? Because no one teaches this part. No one lingers here. History likes the whip, the auction block, the plantation map. But it rarely stays long enough to talk about the body, your actual body, how it smelled after 15 hours in the field, how it ached, how it itched, how it broke open in places no one had time to tend, how even cleanliness became something political. That is the truth this story begins with. In 1842, on a plantation in the Mississippi Delta, hygiene was not routine. It was not comfort. It was not a daily habit. It was a struggle. Every washed face, every scrubbed child, every private effort to clean blood from skin or dust from hair or infection from a wound was an act of resistance. Because slavery did not only steal labor, it did not only steal children, names, time, and sleep. It tried to take ownership of the body itself. And when a person, exhausted and watched and denied almost everything, still found a way to tend to that body, to wash it, protect it, braid it, clean it, soothe it, they were saying something the plantation never wanted said out loud. I am still human. So before we talk about soap, before we talk about rivers and wells and nighttime washing by firelight, you need to understand the landscape, the architecture of deprivation. The distance between the big house and the cabins was not an accident. The distance between the planter's basin and the enslaved person's bucket was not an accident. The absence of clean water near the quarters was not an accident. Nothing about a plantation was accidental. Not the shade trees around the main house, not the porches, not the tubs carried upstairs, not the long walk to the nearest water source for the people whose hands carried that water. One world was built for comfort, the other was built for endurance. And somewhere between those two worlds, before the sun had even risen, a person stood in the half-dark of a crowded cabin, wanting nothing more radical than enough water to feel clean. That is where this story begins, not with a speech, not with a law, with a body, a bucket, and the brutal fact that even washing your own face could become a form of defiance. To understand what water meant, you have to understand the plantation itself. Not as a picture in a textbook, not as a grand house in a field, as a machine. A machine built to separate comfort from labor, and labor from dignity. At the highest point of the property, or as close to high ground as the land allowed, stood the main house. Wide porch, tall windows, shade trees carefully planted where they would catch the afternoon light and soften the heat. Inside, water moved toward the people who owned the land. Pitchers filled, basins carried, baths prepared, towels dried and folded. Heat, when wanted, was made. Privacy, when wanted, was protected. Even before indoor plumbing became common, the wealthy had found ways to make water feel near enough to be expected, near enough to be ordinary, near enough that cleanliness could feel like a right. Now walk away from that house, past the kitchen yard, past the smokehouse, past the stable and the sheds, past the places where the work was done to make comfort appear effortless. Keep walking, because the cabins were not placed nearby, not where water could be shared, not where shade could be borrowed, not where the planter's eye had to look at the full cost of his own convenience. The quarters stood at a distance, sometimes a quarter mile, sometimes more, on lower ground, on rougher ground, on land that collected damp in winter and held heat in summer. Small structures, rough-cut boards, gaps in the walls, a roof that kept out some weather and invited the rest. A single room in many cases, bodies packed into it, breath trapped inside it, life condensed until even sleep became communal. And the nearest dependable water? Not 10 steps away, not outside the door, far enough to hurt, far enough to matter. A communal well, maybe, a hand-dug one, or a stream at the edge of the property, or a muddy source shared with animals, laundry, and runoff. Whatever it was, it required a walk, and that walk was not neutral. It cost time, it cost energy, it cost strength from bodies already overdrawn. Think about what that means. You rise before dawn, lift a wooden bucket or a clay vessel, and start walking in the dark. Maybe barefoot, maybe with shoes too worn to matter, maybe carrying one child in your head while trying not to spill what your body is already too tired to lift. And when you finally bring that water back, it is not yours to waste. That water must cook. That water must be drunk. That water must rinse wounds. That water must clean a child. That water must last. So bathing? A luxury. A real washing? Something negotiated. Something delayed. Something broken into pieces and shared between needs that were all more urgent than comfort. This is what people miss when they talk about hygiene as if it were only habit. Habit needs access. Habit needs infrastructure. Habit needs a world where the body is expected to be maintained. On a plantation, the body was expected to produce. That was different. The distance to water was not laziness. It was policy expressed through space. You do not need a law on paper if the road itself does the work. You do not need to say, "Do not wash," if you make washing expensive in muscle, time, and exhaustion. That is how power often works, not by forbidding directly, but by arranging the world so that what should be simple becomes difficult, and what becomes difficult eventually becomes rare. Meanwhile, back in the main house, the same hands denied easy water were carrying it upstairs. An enslaved woman in the kitchen heated it. Another carried it in pitchers. Another laid out cloth and soap beside a basin she herself would never use in peace. Imagine that. You heat bath water for someone else. You carry it carefully so it does not spill. You wait outside the door while they wash in privacy. And then you return to a cabin where your own face may go unwashed another night because the bucket must be saved for drinking. That is not irony. That is structure. A child in the big house learns that cleanliness arrives with service. A child in the quarters learns that cleanliness must be fought for. One child grows up expecting warm water. The other grows up measuring each cup before deciding whether it can touch skin. And children remember things like that. They remember who gets rinsed first, who gets a towel, who gets a basin, who gets told to wait. That was the geography of the plantation. Not just land, not just buildings. A moral map. A map showing exactly whose body was meant to be cared for and whose was expected to endure. And once you see that clearly, once you understand that even water was divided by power, then you begin to understand why something as small as soap could become precious enough to feel almost sacred. Now let's talk about soap. Not the kind you reach for without thinking. Not the kind that waits in a dry room beside clean water. In 1842, soap was not guaranteed. It was controlled. On some plantations, a small piece might be given out, once a week, sometimes once a month. A sliver, thin, soft, gone almost as soon as it touched water. And that single piece had to serve more than one person. A mother, her children, sometimes a husband, sometimes whoever else shared that space. So every use became a decision. Do you wash your face or your hands? Do you clean the wound or the child? Do you save it or spend it now? Because once it was gone, it was gone. And on many plantations, there was nothing given at all. So people made their own. Late at night, after the fields, after the cooking, after the mending, after the body had already given everything it had, they worked again. Not for the planter, not for the overseer, for themselves. Animal fat, saved slowly, hidden carefully. Wood ash, collected, filtered. Water added, heat applied. Hands stirring a mixture that had to be judged by feel, by memory, by knowledge passed down quietly. No instructions written, no measurements marked. Just experience, just trust, just survival. And when it worked, when the mixture thickened just right, when it cooled into something that could clean skin, that small piece of soap was more than a tool. It was power. Power to remove the field from your body. Power to clean blood from a cut. Power to touch your own skin and say, "This still belongs to me." But even then, soap was only half the battle. Because soap without water is nothing. And water was always the harder thing. One bucket does not stretch far. Not when it must cook. Not when it must be drunk. Not when a child is sick. Not when a wound needs cleaning. So washing became partial. A cloth dipped and wrung. A face wiped instead of washed. Hands cleaned while the rest of the body waited. And sometimes, the body did not get its turn at all. Days passed, then more days. Sweat layered over sweat. Dust settled deeper. Cuts stayed open longer than they should. And still, people tried. Because this was never just about dirt. It was about being seen, even if only by yourself. There is something else you need to understand. something rarely said out loud. On a plantation, your body did not legally belong to you. Your labor did not belong to you. Your time did not belong to you. In many cases, your safety did not belong to you. So what was left? Moments, small ones, fragile ones. The few seconds where you could tend to yourself, where your hands moved across your own skin, where no one was watching. Those moments mattered. More than comfort, more than habit. They were declarations. Because every time someone cleaned their own body, in a system built to deny them ownership of it, they were saying something dangerous. I am not just what you use. That is why hygiene became resistance. Not loud, not visible, not written down, but real. And that quiet resistance lived in the smallest places. In a hidden piece of soap, in a shared bucket of water, in hands that refused to forget what care felt like. Because even when everything else was taken, people held on to that, the right to tend to themselves. When the sun went down, the work did not end. It changed. The fields fell quiet, the overseer's voice faded, the big house filled with light and noise. And in the quarters, another kind of labor began, the labor of survival. Firelight flickered low inside the cabins, just enough to see, not enough to waste. A pot shifted back onto the coals, not for cooking this time, for water. A small amount, carefully measured, heated just enough to matter. Children were brought closer to the fire, sleepy, dirty, heavy with a day they were too young to carry. A mother dips a cloth into warm water, wrings it slowly. You can hear it, that soft twist of fabric. Then she begins. Face first, gentle, even when her hands are tired. Across the forehead, down the cheeks, around the mouth, removing what the day left behind. Dust, sweat, tears that were never wiped. No full bath, no clean basin waiting, just this. A cloth, a few moments, a decision to try anyway. Listen closely. The sound of water being poured, low voices, almost whispers. A woman humming something soft under her breath, not for performance, not for anyone else, just to hold herself steady. Because sound carries, and attention can be dangerous. This is where something important happens, something easy to miss. These were not passive people. They were builders, creators, protectors, of things no one else could see. Behind the cabins, in darkness, small patches of land were worked. Night gardens. Food grown after a full day in the fields, by firelight, by memory, by touch. And just like food, care was grown in secret too. Clothes washed late, hands cleaned when water allowed, children tended to before sleep, because dignity did not wait for permission. It was taken, in pieces, in moments. Now look closer. A woman leans behind another, fingers moving through hair, slow, precise, braiding. Hair was never just hair. It was memory. It was identity. It was connection to something older than the plantation. And maintaining it required time, hands, trust. Each braid pulled tight and even was a quiet act of care. A reminder, you are still yourself, even here, even now. Men sat nearby, sometimes passing a single blade between them, careful, deliberate, shaving when they could, cleaning cuts after. No mirror, no proper tools, just shared effort, shared risk, shared survival. And then there were the wounds, cuts from the field, blisters split open, infections starting beneath the skin. And this is where knowledge lived, not in books, not in doctors' hands, but in the women. They knew which plants helped, which roots cooled fever, which mixtures could clean and protect. They worked quietly, hands steady, voices low, saving lives in ways no one counted, cleaning wounds with precious water, boiling cloth when they could, doing everything possible with almost nothing. Because cleanliness here was not comfort, it was medicine, it was protection, it was survival. And all of this happened in the dark. After 15 hours in the field, after bodies were already breaking, after there was nothing left to give. And still, they gave more. To each other, to their children, to themselves. Because somewhere inside all of this, they refused to let the world decide that their bodies were not worth caring for. So the fire burned low, the water ran out, the room settled, and one by one, people lay down again, cleaner than they had been, not clean, but closer. And sometimes, that was enough to hold on to, until morning came again. Morning always came back. No matter what the night gave you, no matter what small pieces of care you managed to hold together, the system was waiting. And it did not forget. It did not soften. It did not care how clean you tried to be. Because the truth is, this was never about dirt. It was about control. The same system that denied water, denied space, denied time, also created the conditions it later pointed to. Look at them, they would say. Look how they live. Look how unclean they are. As if that condition had appeared on its own. As if it had not been built, maintained, enforced. A lie, repeated often enough to feel like truth. We take away the water, we take away the soap, we take away the time, and then we point at what remains and call it proof. That is how dehumanization works, not just through violence, but through design, through absence, through what is deliberately not given. And yet, in every cabin, in every darkened room, in every quiet moment after the fire burned low, something survived. Not perfectly, not easily, but persistently. A mother still washed her child's face, even if it was only with a damp cloth. A woman still braided hair, even if her hands were shaking from exhaustion. A man still cleaned a wound, even if the water was not enough. They kept the rituals, they kept the knowledge, they kept the idea that the body mattered, and that mattered more than it seems. Because when a system is built to convince you that you are less than human, the smallest act of care becomes defiance. Not loud, not visible, but real and dangerous. Because a person who still believes their body is worth tending to is a person who is not fully surrendered. And a system like this depends on surrender. So the fight did not always look like escape. It did not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looked like water in a bucket, a cloth in tired hands, a child being cleaned before sleep. That was resistance too. Quiet, daily, unrecorded, but real enough to carry forward. Because those moments did not disappear. They were remembered, passed down, from hands to hands, from mothers to daughters, from one generation to the next. And that is the part history almost loses. Not the suffering, we remember that, but the care, the insistence, the refusal to become what the system demanded. So when you think about this world, do not just picture the fields. Do not just picture the labor. Picture the night, the fire, the water, the hands that kept going. Because in a place designed to strip everything away,
people still found a way to hold on to themselves. And sometimes, that is where humanity survives.